Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, December 13th, 2024. Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, Republican from New York, says she believes the U.S. government knows what the mysterious drones spotted over New Jersey, New York, and elsewhere are, and she is calling on the government to, quote, be straight with us and just tell us what is going on. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby asked today about his comments from yesterday, where he said many of the sightings are actually lawfully operated manned aircraft. 1 week until the federal government needs a new funding bill to avoid a shutdown, we'll talk about the state of negotiations with Politico's congressional reporter Daniella Diaz. Secretary of State Antony Blinken makes stops in Turkey and Iraq to discuss the future of Syria, saying the conviction of so many countries in the region and beyond that as Syria transitions from the Assad dictatorship to hopefully a democracy, it does so in a way that, of course, protects all of the minorities in Syria and produces inclusive, nonsectarian government. Ahead of this weekend's Army-Navy football game, former Army Ranger and U.S. Senator-elect David McCormick, Republican of Pennsylvania, along with former NFL and now college football head coach Bill Belichick, joined Medal of Honor recipients at a program titled Worthy Rivals: Leadership Beyond the Field. Plus, First Lady Jill Biden welcomes children to the White House for a Toys for Tots holiday event. And we'll speak with retiring Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican of North Carolina, about what it was like being interim speaker for all of 22 days. CNN reports that federal agencies are facing intense pressure Friday to give the public more details on unexplained drone sightings in the New York City metro area that have been going on for weeks over residential neighborhoods as well as restricted sites and critical infrastructure. New York Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis called the situation outrageous. Malliotakis joined Staten Island Borough President Vito Fossella in demanding answers.
20 years ago, they filmed War of the Worlds on Staten Island. And now we feel like we're characters in that movie. What is happening is outrageous. Thousands of drones and unmanned aerial systems flying above us, and our government is not telling us who's operating them and for what purpose. I don't believe that the United States of America, with its military capabilities, does not know what these objects are. And what I'm asking, and what we're all asking, is for you to be straight with us and just tell us what is going on. As Vito says, this is creating havoc. People are confused, they're concerned, they have anxiety, they don't know what's going on. There's all sorts of theories that are out there. And the best way to address this is to just be honest and tell the American people what is going on. These are not recreational drones. These are not, I don't believe, commercial drones, because if they are violating existing rules and regulations, which say that they need to be under 400 feet and they can't be operating in the middle of the night between sunset and sunrise. So that leaves two options. It's our government, or there's a foreign nexus. And so either our government is doing some type of surveillance activity or surveying, or what really would concern, I think, everyone, there's a foreign government that is doing this type of activity and surveillance, and they're doing it above sensitive infrastructure, Verrazano Bridge, this U.S. Coast Guard base, the Army installation across the water, power plants, ports. And so, again, just be straight with us, tell us what it is, and let's address it the best possible way so we can calm everyone down and make sure that these don't pose a threat to our national security and public safety. Because even if it is not nefarious, the fact that these things are flying all over is a public safety issue. There can be an accident. There could be an explosion. There could be a crash.
Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, Republican from New York, at a news conference today on Staten Island, New York City, along with local officials. Senator Andy Kim, Democrat from New Jersey, posting on X, "Last night I went out with local police to spot drones flying over New Jersey. Here's what I saw. We drove to Round Valley Reservoir, and the officer pointed to lights moving low over the tree line. Sometimes they were solid white light, others flashed of red and green. Senator Kim attached a video that has some commentary.
That's really convincing.
Yeah, they are. They're coming this way towards Round Valley.
Oh, they are getting closer.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the video of the drones posted by Senator Kim. He continues his thread on X. Goes on for 11 posts. The last few read, Homeland Security Secretary briefed last week on new technology they were deploying, but we need details on what those efforts have yielded and if more resources are needed. If they haven't fully identified the devices yet, we still should know what is being done. This has gone on for weeks. It's hard to understand how, with the technology we have, we aren't able to track these devices to determine origin, and this makes me much more concerned about our capabilities more broadly when it comes to drone detection and countermeasures. I'll continue to track these developments and share as much as possible to the people of New Jersey that deserve more answers than they are getting. Some of the posts from Senator Andy Kim, Democrat from New Jersey. The White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby, writes Fox News, claimed Thursday that many of the reported drone sightings spotted over New Jersey for the past several weeks are actually lawfully operated manned aircraft. He was on Fox News today following up on those claims.
I was simply reiterating what the FBI and what the Department of Homeland Security have relayed to us about what they've been able to corroborate. And we haven't been able to corroborate everything. I said many of the corroborated sightings have turned out to be piloted aircraft. I didn't say all of them, and what I said was those are the ones we were able to corroborate. There's certainly ones that we have not been able to, and we don't know the answer to it. And I strongly recommend that for folks that are seeing these things and documenting them to share that as they can with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI,
right, well, let's
the
investigators.
Do that.
Let's share it with you right now. Let's put up this photo. This is the close-up one. Here we go. This is in Bernardsville, New Jersey. So, John, are you able to see this photo?
No, ma'am.
You don't have a monitor there?
No, actually, I turned the monitor off. It distracts me, so I didn't see it.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Well, you'll have to take a look at it after, but I can describe it to you. It is large. It has a white bar that goes through the middle. The right-hand side is half lit up white on the top and red on the bottom. The other side is green. So what would that, you're a former military person yourself. You're an admiral. You're the White House National Security Communications advisor. I'm sure you have seen some of these images. So what is that we're looking at?
It's difficult for me to tell you, Martha. We don't really know. It is possible that some of these things could be commercial drones, developed for commercl purposes. It's possible that they could be owned by private citizens.
But why don't we know, John? That's the point. Why doesn't the United States government know? It seems silly. I mean, it feels a lot like the Chinese spy balloon. It was like, oh, we don't know. It's not a problem. Then we watched it go all the way across the country, and we kept hearing, we're not really sure where it came from until we saw it popped and, floated down over the ocean.
That's not quite how it went. We were pretty honest with the American people that we knew it was Chinese and we knew that where it was going to go. And we were pretty comfortable, given the analysis, that there wasn't going to be an intelligence threat by it. And we shot it down once it was over safe waters and wasn't going to hurt anybody. But back to this. Why don't we know? I wish I could tell you exactly why we don't have an answer for you here in the afternoon on the 13th of December. But I can tell you that we are working on it very, very hard to know, because we want to answer those questions the same as those folks in New Jersey want answers to them. And we are working on this very, very hard. We are now applying. There was an interagency conversation this morning about this topic where we have now decided to employ some additional technology to New Jersey.
The White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby today on Fox News with host Martha McCollum. An NBC News article reads, the hundreds of mysterious New Jersey drone sightings are sparking mounting demands for a more forceful federal response, calls that come as even more sightings are being reported in New York, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. This is Washington Today. The U.S. House and Senate are not in session today. They'll return next week with 1 week to go to pass a federal government funding measure or risk a government shutdown. The deadline is December 20th. Negotiations are underway, we're told, on a temporary funding extension. How long it will last and what else might be attached to it, such as emergency disaster relief money, still to be determined. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, was interviewed on Fox News with host Bret Baier on Wednesday.
Before you even get to the new Congress, you have a lot to do, including 10 days to fund the government. Are you worried about the possibility of a government shutdown?
I don't worry in this job, Brett. I can't. I don't have the luxury of it.
Worries, Mr.
No,
Speaker?
I don't. No. I'm convinced we'll get this done. It will largely be bipartisan, I think, in the end. No one thinks it's fruitful or productive to shut the government down at the end of the year. I think there's consensus that we can do a CR to March. I think it'll be a 3-month CR.
Continuing resolution.
Right. And that will...
Which is not your favorite thing. I mean,
no,
you campaigned on not doing it.
Yeah, well, in principle, we don't like continuing resolutions. But in this case, as a Republican, as a conservative, it does make the most sense. And that's why all the conservative groups are in favor of that idea, because it allows us to make more of these key decisions in the new year when we have the new Congress, new president, new Senate and House.
Daniella Diaz, Politico's congressional reporter, joins us now to talk about the federal government funding deadline in 1 week, December 20th. Thank you for being with us. Where are things with keeping the government open?
Well, if people were hoping that they would be able to go home for the holidays on Capitol Hill, it's looking like that's increasingly going to be the case. Lawmakers on both sides are negotiating and near a deal on a continuing resolution that would fund the government likely through mid-March. Still some dates being played around to see when that deadline would run through. But for now, it is looking like there could likely be text over the weekend. That's the first step for lawmakers to be able to vote on this legislation, which they hope to do next week, and could possibly leave town even before Friday, which is that really important deadline when the government funding is set to run out on December 20th at midnight.
That's for the basic operations of the government. We've also heard that the $100 billion in disaster relief requested by President Biden, he would like that attached. Where does that stand?
That's been one of the biggest sticking points between Democrats and Republicans, actually, because Democrats, of course, want to honor that request from President Joe Biden for $100 billion, and Republicans really pushing that there just can't be that much funding to go into the states that have been affected by hurricanes, by tornadoes, by wildfires. And also, there's a couple of other sticking points that leaders are dealing with. One of them being that they're trying to figure out what to do about farm aid and conservation funding. Aides are in the middle of negotiations on this, but it does seem to be kind of a back and forth that they haven't been able to figure out. And what Republicans want is $16 billion in aid for farmers hit by natural disasters. But there's still a lot of disagreement about $14 billion for conservation programs that Democrats passed under the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's just, one example of a couple of Democrats and Republicans not being able to really reconcile their differences on numbers, on top line numbers. But the fact that the deadline's approaching, aides to both sides say that they're optimistic that at some point over the weekend they'll definitely hit that they need to on both sides for them to agree and move forward with text being released and voting on a bill.
So to pass a bill in the House, you need a majority, 218. In all these cases, if you make changes that some members don't like, you're going to lose their votes. What does the math look like on how many Republicans and how many Democrats may be required to pass this bill?
Specifically to the House, there is a possibility, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds because House process is definitely not the most interesting thing for listeners, but there is a scenario where Speaker Mike Johnson might need to have a majority pass the continuing resolution, or the CR as we call it, that stopgap measure that would fund the government. We do expect Democrats to help support this legislation for the sole reason that there's probably going to be a handful of conservatives who don't like to vote for CRs, will probably not support a CR. And since the Republican majority is so razor thin, Speaker Mike Johnson will need Democrats to help support him on this. So really the likelihood is that we'll see a lot of Democrats support him on this, as long as there are not any legislation or measures writing on this legislation that are, as they call, poison pills, essentially bills or measures that they won't support that are partisan. If that's not the case, Democrats will support, and we should see the exact same thing happen in the Senate, where, of course, they need 60 votes to be able to pass this legislation and move through the upper chamber. And if that's the case, it'll go to President Joe Biden's desk. He'll sign it as soon as he can to prevent a shutdown before Friday.
We're talking with Daniella Diaz with Politico. In addition to the poison pill riders, there have also been some news conferences with members in the House and the Senate trying to get unrelated bills that they favor attached to the CR, since this is likely to become law. What are the negotiators saying about what may be added?
Well, so they're trying to add legislation that could authorize a slew of expiring health programs. They're also looking at adding some riders that would include, bipartisan permitting reform. And there is a measure that would restrict U.S. investments in China. So these are negotiations that are taking place on both sides. When we say both sides, of course, Republican leadership, Democratic leadership, Republican appropriators, Democratic appropriators that are negotiating on what this package could look like in total. By the end, whatever we'll see, it'll likely be measures that both sides, the majority of both sides, could get behind. We don't expect anything too controversial to be part of the CR, because if that were the case, then Democrats would absolutely put their foot down and say they're not going to support this. And Speaker Mike Johnson would need Democratic votes, considering, again, as I said earlier, there would be a handful of conservatives that won't support a CR and never have supported a CR. I think those House Freedom Caucus members. So we do expect this to, for the most part, go smoothly. And that's been the case in all my conversations with these members, with these aides that have been part of these negotiations. Because, again, no one wants to be here over Christmas. That, of course, includes these lawmakers and their staff.
And I guess a final question is the incoming Trump administration having any part in any of these talks?
Not in these talks, no. But it is clear in my discussions with Republican legislators that he's going to play a role in whatever starts happening once lawmakers meet in January, this new Congress, the 119th Congress comes, on meeting and negotiating on appropriations bills. Because remember, a CR is just a continuation of funding at its current levels. Next year, we expect President Donald Trump to play a huge role in how each department gets funded and how the government gets funded. He will definitely put his finger on the scale for what he thinks more funding should go toward, what should be cut. And that's when we expect these negotiations to really be very partisan when he enters office, because that's, of course, going to be the case when they start negotiating these appropriations bills come next year.
Daniella Diaz, Politico congressional reporter. Find her articles at Politico.com and on X at Daniella Micaela. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On Wall Street today, the Dow down 86, NASDAQ up 23, S&P down a fraction. From Associated Press, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made an unannounced stop in Iraq on Friday on his latest visit to the Middle East, aimed at stabilizing the situation in Syria to prevent further regional turmoil. Blinken met in Baghdad with Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani as part of the hastily arranged trip, his 12th to the region since the Israel-Hamas war erupted last year, but his first since the weekend ouster of Syrian strongman Bashar Assad. Blinken has already been to Jordan and Turkey on his current tour and will return to Jordan for urgent meetings on Saturday with Arab foreign ministers to try to unify support for an inclusive post-Assad transition that does not allow the Islamic State group to take advantage of the political vacuum in Syria and secure suspected chemical weapons stocks. That was from Associated Press. Secretary Blinken spoke at a joint news conference in Ankara, Turkey, with the Turkish foreign minister.
As the minister said, we're very focused on Syria, very focused on the opportunity that now is before us and before the Syrian people to move from out from under the shackles of Bashar al-Assad to a different and better future for the Syrian people, one that the Syrian people decide for themselves. And we talked about how Turkey, how the United States, how other partners in the region can support those efforts. And I think there's broad agreement on what we would each like to see going forward, starting with the interim government in Syria, one that is inclusive and nonsectarian, one that protects the rights of minorities and women, one that preserves institutions of the state and delivers services to the people, one that deals with any chemical weapons it may find to secure them and appropriately destroy them, one that rejects any alliances with extremist groups, and, of course, one that does not pose any kind of threat to any of Syria's neighbors. There is, I think, growing consensus on what many of us would like to see, because it's the best way to realize the aspirations of the Syrian people. It's also the best way to ensure that what emerges in Syria gets the support and recognition that it wants from the international community, and which it very much needs after so many years of dictatorship, of conflict, of corruption, of isolation. We also discussed the imperative of continuing the efforts to keep ISIS down. Our countries worked very hard and gave a lot over many years to ensure the elimination of the territorial caliphate of ISIS, to ensure that that threat doesn't rear its head again, and it's imperative that we keep at those efforts. Finally, as the minister said, we discussed Gaza, and we discussed, I think, the opportunity to finally try to complete the hostage ceasefire agreement, to get the hostages home, to get a ceasefire in place. And what we've seen in the last couple of weeks are more encouraging signs that that is possible. And in my discussions with President Erdogan and with Minister Fadan, we talked about the imperative of Hamas saying yes to the agreement that's possible to finally help bring this to an end. And we appreciate very much the role that Turkey can play in using its voice with Hamas to try to bring this to conclusion. We'll be pursuing these conversations tomorrow in Jordan, in Aqaba, with many of our Arab partners. And again, I think you're seeing countries coming together throughout the region, Turkey, Arab countries, as well as partners like the United States, all in support of the Syrian people, of taking advantage of this moment of opportunity to see Syria move in a much different direction, one that finally reflects the will of the Syrian people.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a news conference today in Ankara, Turkey. Another Associated Press article, the United States, its European allies, and a dwindling number of veterans are marking on Friday the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, one of the most important and deadly battles in World War II, which stopped Adolf Hitler's last-ditch offensive and opened the way for the full Nazi defeat. Ceremonies are being held at the Battle of the Bulge Monument in Bastogne, Belgium, and Luxembourg American Cemetery. A spokesperson for U.S. House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, who's on the congressional delegation to the Battle of the Bulge ceremonies, says that she sustained an injury during an official engagement and was admitted to the hospital for evaluation, and that she's currently receiving excellent treatment from doctors and medical professionals, and she continues to work and regrets that she is unable to attend the remainder of the CODEL engagements. That stands for Congressional Delegation. Story from USA Today. Daniel Penny, the former Marine acquitted this week for the death of a homeless man on a New York City subway, will be the guest of Vice President-elect J.D. Vance at Saturday's Army-Navy football game. Penny's attendance adds to what will be a show of force by the incoming Trump administration at the annual sports showdown between the two branches of the U.S. military, which will take place at Northwest Stadium in Landover, Maryland, outside of Washington. President-elect Donald Trump is expected to attend the game, where he will meet with Pete Hegseth, his embattled nominee for defense secretary. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Navy veteran who Trump has considered as a fallback option to replace Hegseth, will also reportedly join Trump as well. That was reporting from USA Today. Ahead of that big game, it's the 125th matchup between Army and Navy football. Today, the National Medal of Honor Center for Leadership held an event in Washington titled Worthy Rivals, Leadership Beyond the Field. The center says it will feature a discussion of Medal of Honor values and how these principles inspire excellence and fuel transformative leadership in all aspects of life. Participants included a former Naval Academy superintendent, Army and Navy leaders, Medal of Honor recipients. Also, U.S. Senator-elect Dave McCormick, Republican of Pennsylvania, an Army Ranger veteran.
Senator-elect, you have had quite an interesting background, West Point graduate, of course, going into the military, then into private industry, now as Senator-elect from Pennsylvania. I wonder how, I mean, having spanned so many different career fields, how have you used some of the things that you learned at the academy, which are at the West Point, that is, that you learned there? How has that followed you through all of these various careers? And you better be ready, because in the Senate you're going to need a lot of these things.
Those various careers, my father, who still gives me advice every day on what I'm doing wrong in politics, would characterize that as not being able to hold down a job. Yeah. So that's been the history. Well, the difference between many of those chapters and what Ed and Earl went through is that you have the opportunity to think about how you're going to apply your leadership values to a situation where they were tested in the moment, and that's much a harder test, and their values came through. You don't get to prepare for that. You prepare for that test, but you don't get to think about it in the moment, and so I'm kind of in awe of the courage that they and others have shown. But those same lessons, those same words apply, and when I sort of look back on my career and many chapters, including lots of failures, very public failures, the things that jump out are kind of having a vision for where you need to go, a battle plan for where you're going to take an organization, having the courage to stand alone, not the kind of courage that they've shown, but the courage to stand on your convictions, stand on your values, go against the grain. The consensus is the consensus for a reason, but is often wrong. And so having the courage to prevail based on what you believe. And the word Earl said, which is probably the most important, is humility. The humility to recognize you're wrong, the willingness to learn from mistakes, the recognition that success is often preceded by failure, and then the selflessness. And the most important thing is just the recognition that leadership is definitionally not about you. It is not about you. It is about the mission, the team, the individuals. It's about lifting everybody else. And to the extent that you're in your head thinking about you, you're probably not a good leader. And those lessons, despite all that diversity, are kind of consistent throughout.
U.S. Senator-elect Dave McCormick, Republican from Pennsylvania, today, questioned by NBC Pentagon reporter Courtney Kirby, an event hosted by the National Medal of Honor Center for Leadership, titled Worthy Rivals, Leadership Beyond the Field, ahead of the Army-Navy football game this weekend. Another panelist was Bill Belichick, former NFL head coach, now college head coach.
It's such an honor to be up here with such a distinguished panel. And being warriors on the football field is a little different than being warriors in real battle. So those are the real bullets. I remind our players about that all the time. Their mistakes end up in first downs or touchdowns or maybe a sack. There's a different consequence on the real battlefield. I understand that. But it's interesting. No, thank you. I'll say this, I've learned so much from the military that's really formulated my coaching philosophy, and almost everything has come from the Naval Academy.
See, we're outweighed here.
Yeah, I mean, all right.
Thank God we have Earl.
And all the things that Sean talked about. The humility in the book Good to Great, that's kind of the number one characteristic of great leaders. I thought that was a really perceptive observation. But like the military and the elite military forces, SEALs and the Rangers and all, they start with, I don't know, whatever it is, 100 SEALs and end up with 20 or whatever. And in the NFL, you start with 90 and end up with 53. So before the season starts, we're firing 37 players, but we're building a team. And so the team building combined with not everybody's on the team is a very, I would say, delicate balance. And the leadership skills that I learned from, again, growing up around the Naval Academy and being with elite organizations in the military, team, teammate, self, in that order, how you think of your job as a football player, team, your teammate, and then yourself, and doing different drills, events, things together that build that, where the team understands that for them to be successful, their unit has to be successful. And football is a team of teams, right? So you have a field goal team, you have a kickoff team, you have an offensive team, you have a goal line team, you have a dime team, it's a team of teams that all has to function together. Again, very similar to a military operation. And so understanding how my term would be complementary football, they all fit together and you all win together when it all works together. That's really, I'd say, really the foundation of where it's come from for me. And I've tried to always make my teams look and act, and I'd say, as we've talked about here, certainly been a lot of failures. Recognize that. I mean, I have a lot of wins, I also have a lot of losses. And I'm reminded of that by the media frequently, so I don't have to worry about ever forgetting that. But it's always a learning process, and you just keep, learning from your mistakes and trying to correct them and not make the same ones and not make the big ones. But that's that team building process, as you mentioned, Courtney. It's very interesting in football. You have players from all over the country, all different, every environment you would want, except New England. There's not too many football players in New England, only a few. So you import them all.
From Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio State, the South. But in addition to that, you're training, as Admiral Buck would know, 180-pound guys, 220-pound guys, 275-pound guys, 350-pound players. So you want the training to all be the same, but it's really not the same. They don't play the same position, they do the same thing. So trying to find that common ground between, well, we're all doing the same thing, but we're really not doing the same thing, but we kind of are, is a delicate, I would say, sometimes manipulation with the team. So a lot of challenges. It's a lot of fun. Beats working, and I'm excited to embark on a new challenge with college student athletes.
It's a lot of fun. You don't always look like you're having fun on the sidelines. I'm just saying, it is fun.
Well, yes, it is. It is.
It's cool. No, that's cool. If you enjoy your job, you never work a day in your life, right? That's what they tell me.
That's Pentagon reporter for NBC News, Courtney Kirby, questioning Bill Belichick, who has recently been hired, University of North Carolina, to be the football coach, formerly with the Patriots in the NFL, on a panel talking about leadership and the military, hosted by the National Medal of Honor Center for Leadership, held at the Reagan Building in Washington. You can find the video at our video library in its entirety, cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We record it right here in the C-SPAN radio studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In a town where extremes get so much attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history, connecting the old with the new. Hear what's happening right now against the backdrop of the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN radio podcast, The Weekly. And have friends and family who love political history and even love C-SPAN's coverage of politics? Tell them about it too. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. It's free and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also available on YouTube. Search Washington Today. At the White House, children from military families streaming in to join First Lady Jill Biden for a U.S. Marine Corps Reserve Toys for Tots event, sorting toys that will be given to families in need this holiday season. It's part of the First Lady's Joining Forces initiative focused on supporting military and veteran families, caregivers, and survivors.
This season can be filled with excitement and wonder, with colorful lights and hot chocolate and presents. Your children certainly aren't shy. That's a good thing. As a teacher, I'm telling you, that's a good thing. But if you only remember one thing for the holidays, after all the wrapping paper is cleaned up, let it be this: you are loved. There are so many people who care about you, from your family and your friends, from your teachers and your classmates, to the president and me. And the best thing that we can do with that love is to let it overflow, to share it with others who might really need it. And I know that you already do this in so many ways by caring for your brothers and your sisters and your cousins, right? Or being a friend to a kid at school who feels lonely. And you're doing it today by helping more children experience the joy of the holidays. You're also a part of the special group of kids who help everyone in our nation through your family's military service. So I want to thank your parents for your dedication to this country, for raising such wonderful kids, and for yes, clap for yourselves. Okay, let's do that. And for bringing delight to the children across the nation who will have these gifts under their tree this year. The President and I are so grateful, and we're honored to open the White House to all of you. So Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And now, are you guys ready to get sorting? Yeah. All right. Well, then let's go. Come on, let's go. All right.
First Lady Jill Biden at the White House with children of military families sorting toys for the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve Toys for Tots program. White House says that Toys for Tots was created in 1947 and has distributed since then more than 652 million toys to over 291 million less fortunate children, and is now in over 800 communities covering all 50 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. The 118th Congress ends 3 weeks from today. This past week, some House members and senators who will not be returning for the 119th Congress gave their farewell speeches. Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, Foreign Affairs Committee chair, is retiring after 58 years in public service. He started as a Maryland state representative in 1967, then moved to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1987 and to the U.S. Senate in 2007. Senator Cardin spoke on the Senate floor on Tuesday.
Across my years in Congress, I've seen what I thought would be a dream come true. I've seen the Soviet Jews liberated from the former Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall torn down, former communist-controlled countries, now NATO allies, and political prisoners released to freedom. It's great to see my friend, Vladimir Kara-Murza, free from being imprisoned in Russia. As Václav Havel, the reform leader of the Czech Republic, said, "There's only one thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause." Each of us can make a difference. Never give up hope. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Everybody can be great because everybody can serve." As my friend and classmate in the House of Representatives, along with my classmate Kwesi Mfume, Representative John Lewis said, we should all be willing to get into good trouble. And as that famous philosopher from Baltimore, Babe Ruth, stated, never let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. I often speak about the need for a value-based approach to policymaking. This has rung true in healthcare and the environment, promoting a dignified retirement and creating economic opportunities for all. Perhaps nowhere has this been more fundamental than when it comes to foreign policy and national security. President Biden got it right when he spoke about our international engagement. He said, "We must start with diplomacy rooted in Americans' most cherished democratic values, defending freedom, championing opportunity, upholding universal rights, respecting the rule of law, and treating every person with dignity."
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, Foreign Affairs Committee chair, his farewell speech on the Senate floor on Tuesday. He's retiring after this Congress in just a few weeks after 18 years in the Senate. Senator Mike Braun, Republican from Indiana, also leaving after one term, 6 years. He ran this year not for re-election in the Senate, but instead for Indiana governor, and won. Senator Braun spoke on the Senate floor on Wednesday.
And it's been from both sides of the aisle. It's been where we've just expected too much out of this place. We need to focus on doing a few things better. Show you the magnitude. 6 years ago, $18 trillion in debt. In 6 years, we've doubled it. We borrow $1 trillion every 6 months, and that's the interest that we pay on our debt now every 6 months as well. We actually borrow $2 trillion a year. This spending spree has had a real effect on the American people. We've got inflation, rising interest rates, and a projected debt that's going to be $56 trillion in 10 years. Any of you good at math, that gets geometrically more difficult to get out of that hole being dug that deep. I had a business, first 17 years, where the office was in a mobile home, got introduced out here, had his office in a double wide. I said it was a used single wide. That was my first and only opportunity of doing what I wanted to do. Well, the overhead was so low, you almost had to stoop to get in the door, figuratively speaking, but I learned a lot of valuable lessons. In the real world, you got to live within your means. Borrowing money from our kids and grandkids is not a business plan that's going to work. How do we turn things around? The best thing, we are not flying blind here. There's an instruction manual. It's called the Constitution, especially the 10th Amendment. As the federal government has struggled, the states have been a laboratory for how you fix things. That's where the innovation is going to come from in the next decade. And I'm so excited to lead that charge back home in Indiana. It was so hard to get here in the first place. The question I get asked most, why wouldn't you stay? Well, I kind of explained that a little bit earlier, that I believe in term limits, and it was an either-or choice. Either run for governor or serve another term here. I'm not going to lose sight of what I've been a part of. But I do feel I've made the right choice.
Senator Mike Braun, Republican from Indiana, farewell speech on the Senate floor on Wednesday. He was elected Indiana governor and will be sworn into that position January 13th. You can find this and other senator and House member farewell speeches at our video library, cspan.org. We have a page dedicated just to these speeches. During Christmas week, C-SPAN will be airing a series of interviews with departing members of Congress, talking with Republicans, Democrats, and independents in the House and Senate, including committee chairs, about their careers, key legislative accomplishments, and the state of Congress and American politics. The series includes Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican of North Carolina. Here's a portion of the interview where he discusses being interim speaker for 22 days after the House voted to remove Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican of California.
I had to make the one fundamental decision that I wanted for nothing. I wanted nothing out of serving as Speaker Pro Tem. Not a bill, not a job, not something in the future, nothing. And once I made that decision, everything else was easy. The next 22 days were easy. Not that they weren't stressful moments. We didn't expect to go through every iteration of choice before we landed on somebody who unified Republicans. We didn't think it was going to take 23 days. But after I made that first decision, it made it so much easier. I didn't want anything. You couldn't offer me anything. You couldn't make me anything. I want to go back and I want to chair the Financial Services Committee. I want to try to get every bit of policy I can possibly get done. That's what I want to do. Now, at the end of the day, I did get two things out of it. I got a wooden plaque that says Speaker Pro Tem Patrick McHenry, and I got a gavel, the ceremonial gavel that I wrapped on that first day. So one's in a shadow box, the other's in a box, and those are my two keepsakes for that little bit of quirk that might be a Jeopardy question one day.
You rapped hard with that gavel.
I didn't say I wasn't unemotional about it. Kevin McCarthy is a dear friend of mine, and what happened to him was completely undeserved. He'd seen success after success in 2023. He kept all of his pledges from opening week and performed well. And so the outcome didn't match the performance. And I thought, this is just unjust, not right. And in that moment, that emotion just bubbled up in me.
Anger?
Yes, anger.
Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican of North Carolina, in a C-SPAN interview. It'll be part of our series of interviews with House and Senate members who are not returning for the 119th Congress. We'll be airing those interviews Christmas week on the C-SPAN networks. Check cspan.org for the schedule coming soon. Former Secretary of State John Kerry spoke this week at his official portrait unveiling at the State Department. He was the 68th U.S. Secretary of State, served in the Obama administration 2013 through 17. The ceremony was hosted by the current Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, number 71, and the portrait will join the collection that begins with the first U.S. Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, who served 1790 through 93. Here is John Kerry.
I have to tell you that in my last job as presidential envoy, I often thought that Tony must have wondered just how long John Kerry was going to keep hanging around the State Department. And now with this portrait, he still can't shake me. But honestly, Tony could not have been more supportive, more welcoming, more solicitous, more empowering, and more, I'm so grateful for the partnership that he gave me in that. When I was privileged to serve as secretary, I always believed that a diplomat's job was to try to calm things down, to try to find the better angels of our God-given gifts, to be able to find a way forward to avoid violence, and to try to find the path to peace, and to make certain that war is genuinely a last resort, above all, and any cause worthwhile for our country. And it's important, needless to say, to get caught trying, as has been quoted a number of times.
Former Secretary of State John Kerry at his official portrait unveiling at the State Department on Monday. An article at shareamerica.gov reads that Kerry's portrait, painted by Stephen Polson, who also painted former Secretaries Madeleine Albright, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and Hillary Rodham Clinton, shows him smiling and relaxed with the rugged New England coastline in the background. The setting is a nod to Kerry's love of the ocean and his earlier career as a U.S. Senator representing the state of Massachusetts. Kerry is shown in the portrait in jeans and a bomber jacket. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. It's free, and get the stories that are shaping Washington sent to you every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.